Welcome to Story District Presents, a podcast for people who love live storytelling. I'm Amy Sedman, your host, and the director of Story District, a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. that's been dedicated to teaching and showcasing the art of storytelling since 1997. In each episode, we bring you a story from one of our shows. Then we meet with the storyteller to find out more about what it takes to tell a great story. This season is all about the 7 deadly sins. And today we bring you a story by John Tong about the sin of wrath, extreme, vengeful anger. John performed this story at a show called Schadenfreude, stories about taking pleasure in other people's pain. Here's John.
My name is John, and I am a large, sensitive Chinese man. I like to wear tight pants and tell strangers stories about my feelings. I've never been in a fist fight. I don't know how to change the oil in my car. And when I'm completely naked, it looks like someone molded stale banana pudding into the shape of a Care Bear. I am not a man's man, and somehow this has all been working out for my wife. Until recently, when we purchased our first home, and I was suddenly thrust into the role of man of the house, a title I am thoroughly unprepared and unqualified for. For example, our first night as homeowners, we spent over an hour inside of Home Depot trying to figure out the difference between joint compound and spackle. When my wife just sort of sighed and said, "I wish one of us were manly." Now, for the record, my wife is a feminist poet who writes in verse about the oppression of the patriarchy and the toxicity of masculinity. And I'm not manly enough for her. But only 2 weeks after moving into our new home, I heard my wife screaming hysterically because she had discovered, dangling precariously from the tree branch above the path to our front door, a 2.5-foot long wasp nest. And when I saw that nest and how upset it was making the woman I love, I immediately experienced this anger, this raw, seething anger. And I had this uncontrollable urge to kill every single one of these insects. And this feeling was so irrational and so intense. I was like, wait a second. Is this what testosterone feels like? So I went onto YouTube. And I discovered that these, in fact, were not wasps, but bald-faced hornets. And based on the size of the nest, there were approximately 600 of them living above our front door. Now, for those of you that don't know, bald-faced hornets are way worse than wasps. They are the most aggressive and lethal insect in North America because they're filled with so much venom, they can sting you over and over and over. And when they sting you, it feels like you got hit by a jackhammer. And if they so much as perceive that you're a threat to their nest, they will chase you for the length of over 2 football fields. And even if you jump inside a pool of water, they will wait for you to surface because their thirst for vengeance has evolved object permanence. Well, my wife wanted to call an exterminator, but they all wanted like $350. And I told her that felt like a tax on account of me not being a man. And she said, I kind of doubt that you can take on one of Mother Nature's most efficient killing machines, given that you once asked another man to kill a spider. and you audibly cried when I found a tick on your back. Now, ordinarily, this sort of appeal to reason, mixed with uncalled for emasculating commentary, might win an argument for my wife. But she didn't know. I had been back onto YouTube. And I had been watching insect snuff films. And these films were made by men, real men, the sort of men that stand around and discuss sport. Men with calluses on their hand, the sort of men that scratch themselves and then sniff their fingers. And I watched as these men destroyed bald-faced hornets' nests with foams and sprays and even a flamethrower. And after hours of studying them, it felt as though their manhood had rubbed off on me. And I devised a plan. So I bought 2 cans of insecticide, and I waited until night. And with my wife nervously waiting at the front door with 911 literally one button push away, I put on a pair of safety goggles and a pair of long underwear and 2 pairs of jeans and a sweater and a sweatshirt and a winter coat and a scarf. And I waddled outside in a suit of armor made out of a J. Crew catalog. But I hadn't taken into account that it was July and the temperature was in the 90s. So within seconds, the goggles fogged up and I couldn't see anything, which was a problem because in all of the videos I watched, they stressed that you don't want to just get the spray on the outside of the nest. All the guys in the video said, if you're gonna do it, you gotta get your spray in the beehole. And I was nervous because I wanted to get it in the beehole, but I'd never seen one in real life before. So I just aimed where I thought it was, and I emptied both cans, and then I ran inside. And I felt pretty good about it until the next morning when I discovered that I'd only managed to kill 3 bald-faced hornets and make approximately 597 of them very upset. Because I couldn't see what I was doing, I had released my spray prematurely. And I had covered our lawn in a bukkake of insecticide, which ultimately destroyed all the vegetation in our front yard, doing hundreds and hundreds of dollars in damages. And I was so furious. I went right out and I got 4 cans of insecticide and a 10-foot tall ladder so I could get right up on that nest. And then I decided I needed a beekeeping hat because they don't fog up. So I went to REI and an employee there said the guy working in the shoe department was a beekeeper. And I thought, what luck! Finally, another man I can talk to. Someone who understands what I'm going through. And so I found the guy, and like all middle-aged employees at REI, regardless of gender, he had a fanny pack and a ponytail. And so I just sort of launched right in, and I told him all about the kind of insecticide I was using and about the ladder and the beekeeping hat because it doesn't fog up. And he just stopped me. And he said, whoa, what's the big deal, man? why don't you just sack up and nuke the fuckers? Let me tell you, in a life filled with humiliation and countless indignities, I think my lowest moment may have been getting called out by a shoe salesman wearing wool socks and Tevas. So I went right home. I didn't even wait for it to get dark. I just put on all the clothes and the beekeeping hat, and I started climbing up the ladder. But about 2/3 of the way up, I realized I didn't check to make sure the ground was level under the ladder. And so it started tipping over into the tree. And my head started falling into the hornet's nest. And as I got closer, I could hear the buzzing of the hornets. So I just threw my weight the other direction, and the ladder fell away from the tree, and I fell from 6 feet in the air onto the ground. And my wife heard the commotion, and she opened the front door, and she saw me writhing in pain on the ground, and she said, "Would you just look at yourself? What do you think you're doing? You're gonna get yourself killed." And when I saw that look on my wife's face, I knew that she was more upset with me than she'd ever been at those hornets. I knew I had to stop. And so I went online to find an exterminator, but I came across this article, and it said that if you can coexist with bald-faced hornets, you should. Because, ironically, they're really good for your yard. And they all just die when it gets cold. So for the rest of that summer, we had a few hundred neighbors living above our front door. We never got stung once, and my wife never said another thing about it. But that November, after there was a cold snap, and I was pretty sure they were all dead, I got my garden hose, and I put it on the power setting. And I took that nest down, and I stood over it, and I said, "I got you." Because my name is John, and I am technically a man.
So, John, you've performed in Top Shelf more than anybody else. You've been on the Story District faculty, and now you're a very accomplished storyteller, but it has not always been that way, right?
Oh, God, no. Oh, no. No, I hold the record for the single worst bombing in the history of Story District ever. Like this was just, I mean, like people are like, oh, it can't be that bad. No, it was the worst ever. It is empirically proven. It's objective fact. No one before me ever bombed this badly, and no one after me has bombed as badly. No one has come close. No, yeah, thank you. Thank you. That's so great that the executive director of Story District, who's literally been to every single show, agrees. I went to a show and I immediately said, "Oh, this is for me. I'm built for this." I spent years acting. I was the North Carolina oratorical champion in high school. Like I was like, these people don't even know what's going to hit them. And then I showed up for the rehearsal and actually think people thought it was pretty good at rehearsal. So I get up onto stage. I'm the fourth one up, so I'm right before intermission. And I've never met you before. This is the first time I've ever even seen you. I get up on stage, and as soon as I walk up there, everything changes.
He is another first-timer. Please welcome John Tong.
And they always say that, like, oh, don't worry, just get to your first laugh. And once you make the audience laugh once, like, everything's going to be fine after that. And that's a lie because, like, I got everyone to laugh once.
I went out and I bought a bunch of tight-fitting designer clothes from Spain so I could look like a rich douchebag.
And then I got everyone to, like, laugh twice.
The Mountain Dew commercial. I had to memorize these endless charts. And then I was thrown out onto the strip with little more than $10,000 in a pep talk.
And then I started thinking, like, oh my God, this is going really good. Like, they really like this. And I was thinking, like, this, you know, and this microphone's fine and all these people. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about things. That's not good. Wait, but I'm not talking.
Now, oops.
And I'm just standing silently in front of a microphone, not talking. And I don't remember what I was supposed to say next.
So at any rate, I went out and I ended up meeting. Wow, I'm really sorry, guys. I'm really sorry. I'm really having a hard time with this. 21. This is what death feels like.
And I just stood there stammering. And that's when the audience, like, gave me this, like, very polite clap that became this roar.
Sorry about this. Hey, everybody. Sorry. You're very generous. You're very generous.
And you were, like, in the front row, and you were looking at me like, what is your problem? Like, come on, man. Like, just get going.
No.
I don't know what was going through your mind, but it just felt like you were just like, you were looking at me like bug-eyed, just like, are you okay? I think actually what it was, you were, like, legitimately concerned for my health and safety. It was, like, the most merciful, gentle thing in the world. Like, you walked onto stage and you stood next to me and you put your arm around me and you slowly pushed me away.
And John, I feel like this is all a scheme. You did this on purpose. Because now it's a cliffhanger and everyone is dying to hear the rest. So, good move.
And I went and I was like, oh yes, I'll just walk down into the crowd now, where I sat, like, and people were just, like, looking at me, and I just sat there like catatonic, like a and I was actually, like, rocking. My wife will verify this. I was, like, slowly rocking back and forth in my chair. You know, I have to say this. This is the reason I tell this story, is because people that come to a storytelling show, this is not a stand-up show, right? Like, people aren't going to heckle you. You know, people that come to a storytelling show are generally, like, they're really smart people and they're really kind and they just genuinely care about hearing these stories. And they know that you're not some professional or something like that. That's not your representation. And so then you offered for me to come back up after intermission just to finish the story. And, like, the way, like, I got, like, a standing ovation practically just before I got onto stage. And it took me a minute to get into it. And I remember I started forgetting my lines again. And I was just like, oh, it's happening again. And then I finished out the story. It was very traumatizing. I don't recommend this experience to anyone. I'm not, like, saying, like, oh, run out and do this immediately. Like, this is the key to success. Like, do not do this. Just learn from me. Learn that just because you think you may be funny or you maybe have written out this great story or you have this fantastic story you've told 100 times, like, the actual thing of doing it on stage in front of people may surprise you.
Okay, so you've told many stories since then, but let's talk about the one we just heard, the Hornet story. What made you tell this story?
Well, it's a little weird. I never really intended for this to be on stage because I was teaching for Story District, and you had asked all of the teachers to put together kind of teaching stories. And I just bought a house, and this is what I came up with for just to run in front of students, because the students would always come in and then they would say, I don't have a story. They would hear other people, and those people would have had stories about traveling around the world or climbing Mount Everest, and they didn't feel like they had anything that was that good. And my whole point to them was, no. Everyone has a story. You definitely just need to kind of, think about different ways of approaching it. So I decided I wanted to make a story that was really about something that didn't have a whole lot of craziness to it. There is a wasp nest in front of my house. I am trying to get rid of it. And then eventually I don't. And that is the story, right? It even has sort of an anticlimactic ending, which is that I don't actually succeed. And so my whole point was just like anything could kind of be a story, in essence, if you can figure out your way into it.
You said that you ended up telling the story on stage because it just kind of organically came out of this class process and practicing it a lot. But does it have meaning to you?
Yes. Every story I tell has a personal meaning to me. And rule number one, if it doesn't matter to you, then it's not going to matter to anyone else. And really, the reason why it was on my mind so much when you happened to ask us to come up with the teaching stories was that there was this constant reminder over my head every day when I would leave my house and when I would come back in that I was somehow insufficient as a man. My wife's father was a Marine Corps drill sergeant for 27 years. And so obviously some women try to find a man just like their dad. And then my wife did that other thing where you find the total opposite. So it's this weird kind of thing. It's I don't know what kind of man I'm supposed to be. Ultimately, I think what the story is sort of when I try to be something I'm not, I make myself and people around me miserable. And so it's probably better just to just kind of accept whatever it is that I am. And because it seems to be going okay. I have a nice little house and I have a wife and, things are okay. Just being me.
I know that you take telling stories pretty seriously, and every time you do want to tell a story, you have a pretty involved process. Can you say more about your process under other circumstances where you haven't done it a dozen times during class?
So I'm a very analytical kind of guy, I'm very jealous of all of those kind of people that are super extemporaneous and that can just, just talk off the top of their head and just be amazing and just really engaging in all of that. So I'm really into the written word on the page. And that's constraining, but also it really helps me because one of the things that you get to do when you write on the page is that it forces you to lose some things that I think a lot of people that just sort of talk don't realize they're doing. For example, they'll use equivocation a lot in their speech. So they'll say something I was kind of upset about that. Well, if you're kind of upset about it, then why even mention it? And you have to make sure that the information that you're providing to people is structured in a way that it is coherent. And it helps to be chronological and it helps to move linearly, in a straight line. I think there's
and to articulate well.
I think our enunciation
exactly.
is critical.
Okay, so there's so many what I like to call teachable takeaways from this conversation. So I just want to highlight a couple. One is that structure works, that you may be resistant to it because you don't want to be confined or you don't want to be like everybody else. But truly, the structure works and that you find your individual voice in other ways through the story you are telling. But you still have an anchor. The other thing I'd love people to take away from this is the idea that you said that you came in with, which is that you can take a small thing. You don't need this huge transformation in your life to make a story. Yours came out of a small thing, but what was great about it is it was so built in this great arc. You had an adversary. You are a protagonist. You had a clear desire, and you had clear obstacles and a clear conclusion. And that made for a great story. And a lot of times the best stories are a very singular thing. And lastly, that people at storytelling shows, in storytelling audiences and storytellers are nice.
They're the best.
They're the best. And that's true.
They're tops.
John, thank you so much for being here today. It's always fun to talk to you.
Well, it's always fun to talk to you too.